you very much. Again, plenty of thoughts in there, I'm sure, for you to discuss in the group sessions afterwards. The final speaker, Stephen Hills, is in. It's a slight change of tack, but he's here to talk a little bit about housing needs. We know we have a housing challenge for the next local plan. We know the city and South Africa has a range of housing challenges, and hopefully Stephen can provide some thought-provoking items for
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. As Stephen has just said, I'm here to talk about, well, the question was, what housing do we need? I've only got 15 minutes. We could have a whole day or more session on this, so I'm going to have to be really sort of focused on the things I talk about. And it's clear already from the opening conversations that this is a wide topic. Lewis Herbert mentioned earlier that a big part of this is about placemaking, as well as meeting economic and social needs. And we've heard a lot about sustainability, environmental issues, none of which I disagree with at the moment. But what I'm going to focus on now is issues around inequality and social need, to set alongside those other things. As I say, it's a big topic. We could be talking about all sorts of things to do with specialist housing needs and so on. I'm going to just focus in on 3 points within my 15 minutes: affordability, key worker housing, and housing for older people. As I was just saying, although I've got CHS right across the top of this is being filmed, and I'm going to speak in a personal capacity as someone with over 30 years of experience as a housing professional, because I've also been asked to be challenging. Okay, I thought I'd just go, we've been looking to the future, but I'm going to go back 100 years. Just to start, back in 1906, Eglantine Jebb published a social study into Cambridge. Housing was one of the topics which came out of that study, and out of that, a few years later, was formed Cambridge Housing Society in 1927. And those words were the founding words of Cambridge Housing Society: homes fit to live in, within the reach of the lowest wage earner. And interestingly, at the time, that was pointedly there because council housing was too expensive for people on the lowest earnings. So Cambridge Housing Society started as an organisation to reach the very lowest earners of in the city, and it's still a challenge now. So, you know, almost 100 years later, we're facing those same challenges in the city. So affordability is a really key topic, and when it comes to challenging and changing issues of inequality, I believe that you have to begin with getting housing right. And it's one of the biggest drivers to addressing issues of inequality that we have as a social policy. There's very often I go to sessions and meetings and people say, well, if only we had this data, or if only we had that information. There's actually huge amounts of data and information already there. As part of the local plan process, there's a strategic housing market analysis, which is a very in-depth piece of work. Some of it's drawn off of government requirements, but there's other pieces of work that supplement that to give us a rich picture of what we need across the piece in terms of housing need in the city. And on a monthly basis, there's something published called the Housing Market Bulletin, which is freely available. It's on the Cambridge Insight website for anyone who wants to look at this. It has been used and picked up by the BBC News at times to illustrate certain points. It's a really well put together piece by some local officers, and this provides regular assessments of housing affordability and so on within the city and the wider Cambridgeshire area. Back in 2018, I was involved in a further piece of work which drew on some of those sources, but we called it the diamond analysis because of the shape of the diagram that we ended up drawing. And this was to try and look across the income spread in Greater Cambridge, and recognising that joint housing market that's been referred to earlier. We did it for each area, but we did something for Greater Cambridge. We looked at the income spread, and then we made a series of reasonable assumptions around the affordability and accessibility of different housing types, different sizes of properties, different tenures of properties. You won't be able to see it from there, but again, this is on the Cambridgeshire Insight website if anyone wants to find the full report. And by driving down, we could see what proportions of the local population were able to afford what types of housing with those reason assumptions built in. That work has been fed into the current joint Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire housing strategy, so it's been deployed already, and that's really helpful to see that. But some of the key points to draw from that, because it was a very detailed piece of work. Around 35% of households in Greater Cambridge have incomes below £30,000 a year. I would argue, for the most part, these are the households reliant on affordable housing. Now, in the current local plan, that's over 11,000 newly forming households that fall into that category. It's a huge number when you think of the homes that requires. These are new homes to be built to meet that measured, modelled demand at that level. One of the things I would say, someone that has worked in housing for many years, those homes, the bulk of those homes, needs to be social rented housing. It's other forms of affordability may be compliant with legislation, but they're not going to reach the needs of most of those people. Cambridge Housing Society was one of the few housing associations to try to hold the line on social rents, but with the way the subsidy system works, it's impossible to do that now. So we're still trying to build a few, we've still got homes at that level of rent, but actually the new developments coming through, the rents are being forced higher. And I think I've often been to events where people say, well, what does affordable mean? Because affordable homes very often aren't affordable, and you know, in part, they're right. If you look at some of the costs of shared ownership, that are affordable housing, to a lot of people that's simply not affordable. It's affordable to some people, but not necessarily the people who most want to address the housing needs of. And in the diagram, you can see how shared ownership in Cambridge City is beginning to not really reaching the people who want to reach it. Slightly different, slightly better in South Cambs, much less so in the city. There was a really interesting debate this week between the National Housing Federation and the Local Government Association. And the Local Government Association saying, stop worrying about social rents, as long as you build enough houses, that will do the job. And the National Housing Federation was saying, no, that's not good enough, you've got to focus on tenure, you've got to focus on real affordability, and social rents is the way to do that. So it's very much a live debate at the moment in the housing world. Okay, let's move on. So linked to this, the diamond analysis also shows that around 26% of the Greater Cambridge population have incomes between 30 and 50k. Now, in national terms, these are above average incomes. But what the analysis showed is that for the most part, these people can't access the market in Cambridge. And I think people know this from personal experience. So what would be considered good incomes are still largely excluded from the market. So we've got this real problem that in this growing economy, we're trying to attract people in to do the jobs that we want to do. Where do they live? And at the moment, people are simply living further afield. And so that's why we've got congestion on the roads and all the other environmental spin-offs that arise from those. People live further and further away in order to work in the Cambridge area because they can't afford to live in Cambridge. So this is a real issue here, but it raises a whole series of other questions. Who are the key workers? I mean, in that group, we've got everyone. Some key workers are people who've got incomes definitely below 30,000, and to some extent they're picked up in my previous comments. But there'll be other people, I mean, there have been key worker programs in the past, but they've been quite narrowly defined, and they've excluded as many people as they've targeted. So there's a real issue, and there isn't an easy answer to this, but we need to think about if we're going to have targeted schemes, who's in those, and who we're going to prioritise. So there's been some work in Cambridge Ahead to try and develop something that they're calling the City Living 10 model, and this is an attempt to try and pull together a legal policy statement that will be looked at by the planners, and could that be a policy requirement within a new local plan? It's got some merits, and I can understand why that work is going on, because they're trying to address this issue of key workers. But my concern is that if you, in a high value area, the way that you may have to make those properties affordable to people is by using land or subsidy, and that land or subsidy could have been used to house your 35% of people, the 11,000 households that have got no other options. So, are you putting resources, vital limited resources, into helping someone on 50,000 and not helping someone on 20,000? That's a real challenge. And I think the way, so is it a planning policy issue to require certain land to be given over, or is it to do with how we fund these things and how we structure the funding of these issues? And there's also an issue there of sustainability and design standards. Again, in the housing press this week, criticism of the what they call micro homes that are being built in converted office blocks in London and so on, where people have a very poor quality of life in the end. I'm not sure that's the road we want to go down either. So, on to my third topic, older people. Again, huge amounts of work done on this by South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge City Council in particular. The last 5 minutes, which is great because it's the last 5 minute slides. We did some work with Sept University, and we said, could you try and produce for us a tool which allows us to forward project the housing needs for older people over a 5, 10, 15, 20-year period, so that we can start to think about what we need to build up. Again, this, if you Google that, you'll find that tool. It's freely available. In the end, they did it for the whole country, so it's quite nice to do something locally that is then used across the piece. They did this project. The results for Greater Cambridge, I will summarise by saying we haven't really got as much of what we need as we would like. So there's going to be a huge demand for specialist older people's housing in the future. We're nowhere near building that at the moment. And there's a whole series of extra issues around that. Just as an aside really, there's a human-centred design project underway at the moment. I'm also a fellow of the RSA. So the RSA in Cambridge, together with South Cambridgeshire, the County Council, and various other bodies are actually doing a piece of work at the moment to see if we can get inside this topic about the sort of housing that older people need, and we're looking at older people's groups to do that. So hopefully something will be published on that at a later point. So we definitely need to think about the specialist accommodation that older people need, because the demographics are telling us that there's an exponential increase in the very elderly that are more likely to need that sort of support. However, 93% of older people don't live in specialist housing. So what we need there are homes that are well designed in advance, well thought out, so they can be adapted in minor ways to allow people to have sustainable quality of life as they age. So that's a real challenge. So my question here is, are we planning to build the right homes now for the next 30 years? I'd say probably right now, no we're not, but that's kind of like why we're looking at these issues today, to see what we do need to do to get that right. And there is just an issue here around older people's. These issues that you can't take them in isolation, in the same way that the pressures on producing affordable rents come from the structure of the government finance subsidy regime for housing. Pressures on providing older people supported housing bound up with government funding of care, and that's not where it needs to be at the moment, and that's putting a lot of care providers under real pressure, with the danger of people exiting the market when we actually need more. So, conclusion. What housing will we need? Homes that are truly affordable rented homes for the lowest income households, and I'd say that means social rent. Homes for key workers that are viable in a high value market area, that means not taking away resources from providing the affordable homes to do it. And homes that will meet the needs of an ageing population, which means getting the design right of general homes, but also getting the provision of specialist homes right as well. Thank you.